Hey, Drew here, and I just finished watching the first two episodes of The Patient. It's a FX on Hulu mini-series, I presume, although who can tell with the way that things are labeled these days. But it stars Steve Carell as Alan, and he's this psychotherapist who wakes up one day shackled to this bed in a patient's basement. And it turns out that the patient, Sam, played by Domhnall Gleeson, is actually struggling with the impulse to kill people. And he's starting to feel remorse for the people he's already killed. And he's looking for assistance in overcoming those urges from Alan. So that's a really good start to this series. You know, right off the bat, you've got an immediacy to this story. And overall, even though it's not so much breathtakingly original as just well constructed and interesting, I would recommend this to fans of psychological thrillers and definitely to fans of the actors. Right off the bat, like I said, they've got a very, very clear premise. It's kind of a combination, obviously, of the psychology therapist in a room with a patient genre. There's all these shows out there that kind of did this, most notably In Therapy. The Israeli series, of course, came first, but most people are more familiar with the HBO series with Gabriel Byrne. And to be honest, I never actually watched that series. I feel like I would have I started watching it and I was just like, this is just too much. I really don't like having a series so limited in what it can do from a storytelling perspective. I think it's an interesting experiment, but I need a little bit more editing and room for the story to be told in a more traditional fashion, for what it's worth. But here, you know, I think some people will find this a little bit slow because, again, it is mainly the dynamic between these two characters in a fairly claustrophobic environment. But I think that right away having this tension that you never know what Sam is going to do. Domhnall Gleeson layers this character with equal parts menace and also just emotional vulnerability. And the menace oftentimes goes unspoken. I think that's one of the more clever aspects of the writing, is that we don't know just what Sam will do, but he's not one to make idle threats. And recognizing that, you know, we're as terrified of him as Alan is. And there's this scene in I think it was the second episode. The episodes are very short. They're only like 22 minutes, so they kind of run together. And I do wonder if that's going to be a problem over the course of the series, that if they're releasing this an episode at a time, if people are going to struggle to maintain interest with such bite-sized portions of storytelling. But nonetheless, this moment in the second episode, I believe, when Alan tries to escape, and there's just this tense moment, and I'm trying not to give out specific spoilers, but where he's worried that Sam will realize that he tried to escape. And the tension there was just palpable. And you don't even know what Sam would do, you know, how he would respond to that. But you definitely just have this strong sense of danger that permeates this entire series. And again, you know that Alan's probably not going to get killed by Sam immediately, but there's just this unspoken dread of the character, and you know, you just don't know what he's capable of. But the interesting part is, I think that because you've also got the psychotherapist aspect of this story, it really shifts the power dynamics, because, you know, in therapy, you're kind of, I don't think that a lot of people like to look at it this way, but you're allowing yourself to be vulnerable. You're allowing yourself kind of to be under the emotional control of another human being who perhaps has a better idea than you what you might be struggling with and what you need to do to grow. And in that situation, you're surrendering control to a certain extent. And I think it's fascinating. The premise of this series is a little crazy that such a person would go to such lengths. But when you hear this story that he tells in the second episode about this person that he wanted to kill and the frustrations that he experienced, you realize that he's someone who really fears not being in control, and that he would take this psychotherapist, that this is the only way that he would feel comfortable actually sharing, bearing his soul to someone, as if he held control of the situation, if he was the one who had the unspoken upper hand. And I think it's going to be interesting, you know, in keeping with that story he told, that the series will get to explore, you know, how is this person different than other people? Is he actually different than other people? Is he more like the rest of society than we want to admit? I think that oftentimes people want to act as though the vicious people, the murderers in society, are different than the rest of us. But I think that they oftentimes just expose our society's weaknesses, our society's flaws, and they are most certainly the product of our society. And I think that another interesting aspect of this series is that the character of Alan, Steve Carell, you know, it's hard sometimes for me personally not to see him as his most popular character, Michael Scott, but he really has fine acting qualities and brings a lot of nuance to this character, and just this everyman quality, but also just this sense that he's a thinking man and that he's trying to analyze his way out of this situation. It's really fascinating to watch the dynamic between these two characters, and him trying to wrest control of the situation from Sam, and not being used to not having the ability to, you know, have control of his patients to a certain extent, not being the one in charge of the room. You know, it's interesting, there's a line in one of these episodes where he talks about how he has always tried to understand himself so that he could understand his patients. And I think that he has a lot of personal stuff going on. His wife just died. He's estranged from his son. And I think that as the series progresses, that he's going to learn more about himself from learning about Sam, and that's going to be a new experience for him, realizing that he can work out some of his own issues through the understanding of other people. So there's a lot of interesting stuff to explore here, power dynamics, what makes someone want to kill. I think that the reasons that this character gives are certainly a lot more relatable than you might expect. And while most of us might not admit that we have a desire to kill someone, I'm sure you've had a desire to hurt someone that you felt wronged you. And I think that this series really does a good job of making this character, I don't want to say sympathetic, but I'll go ahead and say it, sympathetic. So I think it's really interesting. I think if you like if you're at all interested, I think you should give it a try. It seems like a good show to binge though, so maybe wait until all the episodes are out if you don't think that you could stand waiting, and hopefully you don't forget about it in the meantime. But those are just my thoughts for what they are worth. If you're interested in seeing my upcoming reviews of other shows, please consider subscribing to the channel. And as always, thanks so much for watching.